Okay, guys, this week we are going to be talking about the Bill of Rights for social studies. Now, for your reading class, you should have finished through chapter 6. This week we're going to read chapter 7 through 15, which it sounds like a lot, but they're small and you'll do just fine. What we're going to talk about, though, when we talk about the Bill of Rights is kind of use that as a way to see how maybe some of those rights were being violated as you read the book. Like, what did they do to individual liberties, even so soon after the Constitution had been signed and ratified and the Bill of Rights had been ratified? So kind of pay attention to that. But for now, what I'm going to do is talk to you about the first 5 amendments. So let's start with the Bill of Rights. How did we get here? Remember those anti-federalists, the ones who were against the Constitution? They refused to ratify the Constitution because they felt like there was too much federal power. We didn't want stuff to be like we'd had under the king. We wanted to protect the rights of the people and to have the power come from the people. So they said, hey, if you do this Bill of Rights thing, we'll ratify your Constitution. And that's what we did. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are the Bill of Rights. To amend something is to change something. Excuse me. So we've done 10 amendments to change something about the Constitution, in this case, to make sure that we've protected what the Founding Fathers called the inalienable rights. And we'll get to those in a little bit. Most of the ones that we list are the ones they believe people are born with. That's the inalienable part. It's the government's job to protect those rights. The government doesn't give us those rights. We're born with those rights. The government's job is to make sure those rights can't be taken. So this is a way to keep the government kind of in check. They started by looking at what they felt the British government violated. A lot of what you'll see in the Bill of Rights is the British government did this and we didn't like it. How do we keep it from happening again under this new government? So let's start with the First Amendment because that covers a lot. 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. Hopefully you remember your hand motions from class. So we had freedom of speech. You had your index finger and touch your mouth. You had freedom of the press, where we held out your palm and you pressed on it, just to remember press. But freedom of the press was for publishing news and things. The freedom to assemble, that's the one where we did come here with your hand. Assemble means just to gather in a group. Freedom of petition, that's where you held your hand flat and you used your index finger like a pen and you pretended you were writing. And then freedom of religion, that's where you pointed at the sky. So freedom of speech means that you can't get in trouble for what you say as long as what you say is not designed to violate somebody else's rights or to start a problem. For example, you cannot get on an airplane and say, I have a bomb, because you will very quickly be taken off of that airplane. It's not protected speech because it's going to scare everybody and it's illegal to make something that would be called a terroristic threat. So just keep that in mind. You have the freedom to say whatever you want, but you're not always free from the consequences if the thing you say is not protected. Freedom of the press. The government can't tell the press not to publish something. They cannot call up the news and say, I don't like how this makes me look. Don't publish it. Think about it. There are a lot of people in power who, if they could do that, would absolutely do that. Other countries do not get this right. Freedom of the press means the government does not get to say what the news gets to say. Freedom to assemble means they can't tell you that you can't gather. Now, recently, they said, with all the COVID stuff, hey, you can't have people more than this many people, and they kept reducing that number. Did that mean you were going to go to jail if too many people gathered? No, it did not. What it did mean is that you were probably putting people at risk, and this was what they were doing to kind of prevent the spread of COVID. So could we have, for example, kept school going? Sure. It wasn't a responsible thing to do. Churches that started doing online chose to stop gathering, but they didn't give up their freedom of religion. See how that worked? Even though the government said, hey, you shouldn't all assemble in the same place, they didn't say you shouldn't have church. And so people worked around it to figure out what we could do to still kind of gather and exercise the rest of our rights. Freedom to petition just means we get to ask the government for something. You might sign a petition that says, oh, right now in our country, so many petitions and things are being signed as part of the movement for change for the Black community. So petitions are one way that they accomplish that change. And freedom of religion means that the government can't say, this is your religion and you have to do it. And that's because actually all of this is because of stuff under Britain. But the religion piece is because they were Protestants. And they said, you have to be a Protestant. Catholics were persecuted. Jews were persecuted. Anybody of a different religion was persecuted. So freedom of speech went under the British Crown. We couldn't say whatever we wanted. You couldn't call the king a terrible name. You would go to jail. They could stop the presses from printing so people couldn't get news. They could tell the colonists, you can't gather. The king didn't have to hear your petition. He didn't have to listen to what you had to say. So these first 5 amendments are very much connected to what problems we had under the King of Britain. Then we get to the Second Amendment, which most of you know. Everybody says Second Amendment, right to have guns. It's a little bit more than that. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So at the very beginning, we didn't have a big army. We didn't have police forces. We included this because even though we didn't have an army, we still had problems. Like we still had Indian attacks, and we still had France to the north, and we still had Spain to the south and to the west. So we needed a way to protect our communities. That has evolved over time for people needing to protect themselves and their community, your neighborhood perhaps. And so right now, today, it's more of a necessity as people protect themselves when the government's not able to do so. So self-defense. But I know there's a ton of controversy that has happened about whether we should have it, but we've changed the amendment a little bit over time. Just know that that's sometimes possible. The way we changed this one was we said, hey, we have to include all people because freed slaves obviously couldn't own guns at the time. So we made some changes to allow them to do it. But the core of it, the well-regulated militia, that does not change. We might add an amendment later to make sure that everybody's included, but the core of this says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, which means you can't do anything against that. Third Amendment. So we didn't talk about why the Second Amendment was a big deal, and that's because the king didn't let people have guns. You could have a gun for hunting, but they could take it away from you. They could tell you didn't need it. They could collect it for their army. So that's why that piece. The Third Amendment, no soldier shall in a time of peace be quartered in any house without consent of the owner, nor in a time of war. Which, when you say time of peace and time of war, it means at no point at all in time can you have a soldier that has to stay in somebody's house. Why do they need to add that? That seems like a no-brainer. They have barracks, they have other places to live. Why does it become the citizens' responsibility? Well, the British Parliament passed laws in 1765 and 1774 that said, hey, if we run out of space to put these troops, they get to go in your house. And that happened frequently, especially as tensions heated up between the colonists and England, and they would send troops over. Those troops would take over people's homes. And those people could still live there, but they would lose their bedrooms and they would lose a lot of their food, and they would have to wait on the soldiers and things like that. So we definitely didn't want to do that again. Fourth Amendment. All right, we're about to get into the amendments that deal with persons accused of crimes. And that's 4 through 8. So we've got a lot. We're only going through 5 today, so don't worry. This one says, basically, you've got to have a warrant or probable cause to search somebody, to seize or take their property. That search of somebody includes their body, physically searching them, house, any papers or documents. These days, it can mean digitally searching. They have to get a warrant to search your email. They have to get a warrant to access your phone. So, or your computer. So it does change because times change and technology changes, but it means basically anything you have that's attached to you, if they want to look at it, the government, they have to have a good reason. So they have to take that information to a judge, and the judge has to say, okay, I think that's a good reason to look at them. So here's your warrant. Sometimes you don't have time to go to a judge, or you don't need to. So this is like if the police, you're driving, you're speeding a little bit, you get stopped for the ticket, and when the police officer walks up, he smells marijuana from your car. He's going to search your car. That is probable cause that you're committing an illegal act. So just keep that in mind. They don't always have to have a warrant, but they always have to have a reason. The reason will either get them the warrant or allow them to do the search right then. Fifth Amendment. There's a bunch to this. Most of it is about crime. The last piece, not really about crime, but we'll talk about it. Grand jury has to indict a person for a serious crime like capital murder. You can't just have a district attorney that goes, you know what, I think I'm going to charge you with capital murder. It's like an extra step so that people don't get charged with crimes that the evidence doesn't support. Double jeopardy, you can't be tried more than once for the same thing. So let's say you steal a car and you get caught and you go to jail for stealing that car. But later, you get out early. Prison's crowded, good behavior, whatever. You get out after like a year and you were supposed to serve 10. And the prosecutor doesn't like it and says, you know what, we're going to do this again so you can go back to jail. That's not allowed. You've already done what you had to do to pay for your crime. So you can't be tried again. Sometimes this happens where you commit a crime and you go through a trial and they find you not guilty. And then later they find more evidence that says, hey, you're guilty. Well, that's tough. They don't get to try you again. You already got acquitted of that crime. You don't have to testify against yourself. This is called self-incrimination. You don't have to say things. They're going to tell people you did something wrong. That is known as the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. It's where we get the Miranda warning. Your life, your freedom, and your property cannot be taken from you without due process. That means they have steps to do. They can't just throw you in jail and say, well, there you go. Or take your stuff and say, oh, it's mine now. This is not how that works. There has to be a series of steps taken. You have to have a warrant to search your property, to take your property. You have to have a trial. You have to have a lawyer. You have all these conditions that have to be met. And then after they meet all these conditions, then they can take your freedom, your property, or depending on the crime, perhaps you're being executed for that crime. Your property, this is the piece that doesn't go with the crime thing. Your property cannot be taken for public use without compensation. This is called eminent domain. When the government wants to build something that's going to help the public, they can take your property. They have to pay you for it, but they can take it. So this is when they want to build a road and they need part of your yard. They can do that. They can pay you for the land and then they can build their road. This happens all the time, especially with the country growing at the rate it's growing. If it's for public use, they have the right to take it. You have the right to fight against it, but they have the right to take it and they have to pay you for that land. So, fourth and fifth have been about crime, 99% of it, except for that eminent domain thing. This is because the British government could just walk into your house and arrest you for no apparent reason. They could start going through all your things. Imagine if you have an officer being quartered at your house because the government says you have to put him up, and he decides to take a peek in the trunk, and he starts finding out that you're with the Patriots and you're a revolutionary, and so he throws you in jail. Well, that happened quite a bit. And so we wanted to make sure that people were protected as much as possible. And sometimes people were thrown in jail for no good reason whatsoever. And their stuff was taken because somebody made it up on the spot so they could have the stuff. The Fifth Amendment also covers things that we had to do to protect the rights of an accused person. When somebody's accused of a crime, that does not make them a criminal. That makes them somebody who's accused of a crime. So they get all of their rights up until the moment that they are convicted of the crime and lose some of their rights. Keep that in mind. All right, we went 1 through 5. We did all the hand movements for the First Amendment. The Second Amendment, we all know, make your finger to the shape of a gun. The Third Amendment, just pretend you're sleeping. You know, the two hands on the side of your face and lean your head over. Sleeping. You can't crash on my couch and get that tank out of my yard. No quartering. Fourth Amendment, I think we did this with knocking. Like the police have to stop and knock. And the Fifth Amendment, I think we did the right to remain silent. I don't remember. I'll go through all of the hand movements at the end of the next one, just so that you guys have that in your head. But that's it for today. Hope you had a great weekend. I hope this is a better start to this week than we had last week. Quite a few people did not do their work. So I'm hoping this week you're in the swing of things and it gets a lot better. And on Wednesday, we will have another video.